In this video, we will be learning to play a piece by the Romantic composer Robert Schumann, which has the English title From Foreign Lands and People. This piece is the first and most accessible piece from a collection of works called Scenes from Childhood, and it's worth noting that the famous piece Traumerei also comes from the same collection, and so I'm sure you're probably going to end up encountering that piece later on as well. Now, the piece From Foreign Lands and People is quite short, and it has a very minimal amount of unique material to learn. In fact, I've highlighted the unique material, and you can see that the piece is only one page long, and really it's only one part of a page that you have to learn. However, the difficulty is a little higher to compensate for this. With that said, it's very pianistic, it feels very comfortable to play, it sounds really nice. And so for all of these reasons, it's very much considered to be part of the standard repertoire for the piano, and most pianists will likely encounter it at some point in their study. Now, I'd like to draw your attention towards the compositional nature of this piece, okay? This piece actually has 3 distinct layers of sound, and this is probably a new concept for you at this point in your study. However, you are going to encounter this same compositional layering in pretty much most romantic music, and like most especially waltzes and nocturnes and things like that, okay? So here is the idea behind the layering. You have the melody, which is this top voice right here. I'm actually going to draw it on my iPad real quick so you can see. So the melody is right there. Sounds like this. Okay. And then we have some bass notes, right? Which will sound like this. Actually, it'll be on finger 4. And then you have this middle layer, which sounds like this. And we would refer to this middle layer as the accompaniment. Right? So there are 3 distinct things going on. And normally what you would probably be accustomed to seeing by this point would be the accompaniment and the bass really would just be one thing. And maybe on this piece you can kind of technically think of it like that in terms of how you would play it. However, it's not written that way. You can see that the bass notes have stems that are facing down and they have rests. It's obviously another voice. It's obviously a third voice, okay? So that's what I want you to start to tune your ears to, is to hear these 3 layers. And I'm going to go ahead and play this a little bit for you so you can see that. I'm playing it really slow, right? And one of the interesting things here as a practice strategy is that you can isolate these different layers. You can practice like the melody and separate that out. You can practice the accompaniment and separate that out, right? And you can actually just practice that and get accustomed to that with all of the indicated fingering and everything. Like, that's a legitimate practice strategy. It's very, very helpful. And then you can also pick any 2 out of the 3. So you can pick the bottom voice and the top voice. You can pick the bottom 2 voices. You can pick the top 2 voices. So there's a lot of ways to practice this piece, especially if you run into roadblocks. There's always something else that you can try to help you familiarize yourself with, how this is supposed to feel. Okay? So the next thing I wanted to show you is the rhythm in this piece. That's the other tricky point. Other than the layering, the rhythm's just a little tricky, right? We're in 2/4, but we're mostly going to be feeling the triplet. So you'll probably want to count 1 olet, 2 olet, like really slow. And there's occasionally going to be a note that's between the last triplet of a measure and the first beat of a new measure. And so that's one of the things that kind of makes this piece sound unique and makes it stand out from the other pieces, okay? And also note that we're not really going to try to get like insanely accurate on the rhythm for the part that has the little 16th note. And I'm actually talking about this right here. I don't think that mathematically comes halfway in between the end of the triplet and the next beat, but you'll probably play it like that because it does occur between there. I just don't know if it occurs halfway between there exactly, but we're going to just pretend that it does, because I don't think that the point is for it to be mathematically precise. It's just so, like, Schumann wrote it in such a way where the note would fall in between the triplet. And I'm talking about, let me draw your attention to it. That note, right? You're going to play it pretty much between the last triplet and the next triplet. Okay? And I'll go 1, oh, let, 2. Those are the syllables that I would normally use. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's one of the challenges with this piece, but it's the same thing. It's the same rhythm that happens throughout the piece. So, if you can figure out one of them, you're going to be fine on the rest of them, okay? Now, when you're practicing, it's very important to play very slowly. You want a very steady triplet pulse, and you want to be able to observe all of the details across the 3 layers. And as I mentioned, you may want to separate the layers as a practice strategy while you're learning. And also, this is a romantic piece. It is built to use the pedal. Pedal is implied. And you're probably going to do like 1 pedal per harmony change, like a standard way of pedaling it. However, while we work this out, I think you should leave off the pedal. And I'm going to, hopefully I'll remember, I'm going to try to leave off the pedal while I demonstrate it, okay? Because I want to show you what's supposed to be connected and what it is okay to allow to be disconnected, because you're not going to be able to manually connect everything on this piece. You absolutely need the pedal, okay? So now I'm going to help you work through this piece, and I'm going to demonstrate how each measure and phrase should sound. I'll remind you that we're in 2/4, and we're going to be feeling the slow triplet, and we're also in the key of G major. And one other note before we get started, you should properly prioritize your 3 layers. The top layer, the melody, that is the layer that you are going to really allow that arm weight to create a very penetrating sound. Not too much, like don't assist it by pressing down really hard, but we really want that weight like that. It should sound like a bell, very clear, okay? You'll notice the dynamic marking starts out as piano, but obviously that's going to need to be well above that. That could be mezzo forte, and then you could just subdue everything else to like pianissimo, right? And let it average out to present overall as soft. But the arm weight goes on the top voice. I'm exaggerating. But believe it or not, that's closer to where you're actually going to end up than you would expect, okay? So subduing the other parts is a main challenge with this piece. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to go through this unique phrase by phrase, right? So the yellow material, or the material with the yellow lines, that's what I want to focus on. And I'm going to walk you through it, okay? Now, I'm not going to show you all of the possible permutations of all of the layers because that would take forever, but I am going to show you the important ones, okay? So, for example, it may not be necessary for you to separate the bottom layer from the middle layer right away. I mean, you can try it if you want, but, the bottom layer and the middle layer are sort of fused together. So I'm going to demonstrate that way, okay? Let me remind you of what it looks like with the middle layer separate. Here's what the middle layer looks like for the first yellow area for the first phrase. Notice the fingering, and also notice this will be fully legato. It's very important. Okay, and you will move around. So it's worth, maybe it's worth doing that on these for a little bit, but I don't think I need to show you that the whole time, okay? Now the next thing I'm going to show you is the left hand and really the bottom 2 voices of the 3 layers. The bass and the accompaniment. And notice that you have these rests written in right here. The rest is really just encouraging you to get off of the note because you're going to need to be able to move around. You do not need to be literal with it because the pedal is going to eliminate any sort of precision you might have with the rest. You'll see what I mean. Right now, when you play both of these voices, you can either let go of everything when you get to the D, like that, which would be fine, or you can let go of everything. Well, really what you're going to do is you're going to let go of the B, and then when you get to the D, and then you get to the next note, you'll release. So that second way sounds more complicated, but I find myself naturally wanting to do that, so that's the way I might demonstrate it. So I apologize if that seems overly complicated, but remember, you can just play it like this and just let go of everything, so long as that middle voice is connected, okay? So let's actually show you what this is supposed to look like. I'm going to show you with the counting and then a little bit without. Here we go. 1, O, let, 2, O, let, 1, O, let, 2, O, let. Okay? Does that make sense? Here's without the counting, so you can listen. Now you'll notice the second chord right here on beat 2 of the first measure. I like to pivot on the B flat. You don't have to. You can let the pedal connect, but I prefer to manually connect where I can, just because it keeps my hand steady, it keeps everything very steady, and it feels very grounded. Nothing's floating, as long as I'm touching one of the notes. So I do that. Okay? All right, and then I'll show you the melody, which is easy, but it's worth talking about the counting. So you'll be like 1, O, let, 2, O, let. There's a suggested substitution here, so you'll substitute right away if you do it. 1, O, let, 2, O, let, like that, right? It normally would be 1 E and 2, right? But we're not going to mess with the E endas in this piece because it's completely unnecessary. You really just need the which is the final syllable of the 1 E enda. You just need the 1 O let, 2 O let, 1 O let, 2. And I have a counting demonstration where I basically do this. So hopefully that makes sense. Keep the wrist not bouncy, but fluid and loose. And allow the arm weight to go down with the wrist, right? That's how I'm creating that sound. You know, 1 O let, 2 O let, 1 O let, 2. You don't have to choreograph it any specific way. Like, I know I'm doing some down and up motion. Like, you don't have to do it exactly like I'm doing it, but you can't freeze. You can't do this. It's not gonna work. It's gonna sound bad, and it's gonna feel uncomfortable, okay? This needs to really be opened up, and you're gonna need that mobility. Let me show you what it sounds like put together very, very slowly. I didn't mean to hold that B flat. Right? Notice that these the inner voice, the inner accompaniment voice is separate from the melody. So it happens, you know, you still hear the D. Still hear the D. That's pretty important because your pedaling is going to play into that. Let me show you what it sounds like with pedal. I'm going to go really slow. Clear here. Clear and substitute. Right? That's what you want to go for. And I'll show you the counting. 1 O let, 2 O let, 1 O let, 2 O let. So hopefully that makes sense. One last thing you could try, I'm going to mention it now because I'm probably going to forget it if I don't. Outer voices. 1 O let, 2, practice the letting of the left hand go. 1 O let, 2 O let. You're in really good shape as a starting point. Like, that's a good day one goal. You're in good shape if this is what you start with and you're able to do that, you're able to count and you're able to let the left hand go and keep the right hand sustained, you're in really good shape to be building the type of choreography this needs. In fact, a great first day goal would be for you to learn a couple of phrases with the outer voices, with the counting, with the left hand detached and correct fingering, and maybe just alternate through the phrases a couple of times, and then sleep on it, and then check it the next day, and you'll find that all of a sudden the layering makes more sense and it's easier to do it. So that's my suggestion for how to go about practicing pretty much this whole piece, okay? Now let's go on to the next yellow highlighted area, which is going to be the second system. So we have a longer phrase here, and it's a little bit more challenging in a couple of ways because we've got a couple of tied notes. So I'm going to show you the bottom two layers to start off with. Of course, you can separate them if you want, but I'm going to show them to you very, very slow. Here we go. You're going to hold this middle voice right here. Sorry. And you're going to keep holding it. Then you let it go. Sorry. It's confusing for me to take it apart now. Don't worry about my fingering because of the pedaling on this piece, and also like that we're not really going to ultimately be going super fast. I really don't think the fingering is that important. I think it's only playable in a couple of ways. Any way you can do it is fine, so long as you can get the things that are supposed to be legato, and not mess with the pedal. Okay, I'm going to do that one more time to show you the tied notes. And also to make sure I play it correctly. Notice the pivot and the tied note. And then I'm trying to be very soft here too, by the way. By the way, given the need to manually connect the middle voice, you are going to feel some serious stretching. Not in a hurtful way, but if you're immobile at all, this is a really, really good piece to help you fix that, because you're just not going to be able to get anywhere if you remain fixed. You have to be able to really just, go all the way, at the opposite of direction sometimes with the wrist laterally. And also there's a vertical component too. So anyway, let me show you what this part sounds like with the with all three layers. Now I'm going to show you with the pedal. Let me do that again because I didn't get a good bass. I still didn't get one, sorry. Sometimes if I'm playing soft enough, this will happen to you, I'm sure it's already happened. If you don't press the key with enough velocity, it's not going to sound. And so I'm trying to be soft and I'm overdoing it. I'll do it once more for you. I'll speed it up just a little bit. Notice the harmony doesn't change in this last measure, so you can hold the pedal through there as long as you get sequentially quieter, or progressively quieter, really. Okay, so that's one of the more challenging phrases because it's longer and also because it's got some tied notes. But that's how this is supposed to feel. And I just want to make sure, let me make sure there's nothing else to tell you about the tied note right here. It takes some practice to get that going. Just practice pivoting. Now this, remember how I showed you that I pivoted on an earlier note, which was kind of optional as to whether or not you pivot on it. This is not optional. You have to do this in order to play it correctly, right? So you're gonna press the bottom note, release it, pivot, hold it, press the top note, let go of that when you press that. It takes extreme patience and slow practice. And it's going to become even more necessary when you see the most challenging measure, which is coming up, but not yet. So I'll do that one more time. Let go of the bottom voice. Okay. So just practice that pivot. And then go to the next one when you're ready. And then you can add the melody. And pedal, if you're, well, actually, you know what? Leave off the pedal. That's what that's going to need to sound like. All right, now I'm going to go on to the B section, and we're going to work on the first set of unique material from this part. I actually think that this is a little bit more straightforward, and also notice that you have more than one voice on the right hand as well, and you have stems facing down. So I mean, this part kind of turns into a 4-part, but we'll go ahead and just treat the top 2 notes together. Okay, so let's work on the bottom 2 voices. I'm going to show you what that's going to sound like. It's a short phrase. We start out in G major. Now we're in E minor briefly. I'll show you the counting. Although again, reference the counting video if you need more focused work on that. So 1 O let, 2 O let, 1 O let, 2 O let. You know, it's interesting in this part. I'm sure you probably noticed what's happening here. The bass is taking the melody's original rhythm, and it's using that as kind of a counter against the current melody with the chords, which I think is really cool. So I'm going to show you that. That's pretty easy. Leverage your wrist on these, okay? And by the way, that was a great example of what not to do, right? We don't want that. So we want to know your instrument, get real close, drop the wrist to get leverage, raise the wrist and then drop it to get leverage. You can stretch here and then here. Okay? You can even practice this with the bass if you want. And of course with all of the voices. With pedal. Not too uncomfortable in my opinion. Let's go on. So the left hand here with the accompaniment. Okay, needs something like that. I'll do it once more for you just to try to be as consistent as I can. The pedal's gonna hold these notes, by the way. Okay, so I'm trying to hold it where I can, but you know, you're not gonna be able to do everything, and that's okay. All right, and then when we put let me play the right hand real quick. By the way, the proper way to do something like this, you're gonna let go of the bottom note because you have to re-articulate it, but hold the top note. That'll allow you to at least stay in contact with the piano. You hear how the melody is, the top voice is connected, and I'm still re-articulating the E. That's nice. The pedal's gonna make it to where that's not so necessary. So you might wonder, well, why would he bother explaining that if that introduces unnecessary complication? Well, the reason is because if you don't do that and you lift, you're gonna lose contact with the key. And for some people, it makes it harder to keep a consistent line of the same volume. As we're here, because I'm staying in contact, you may find that that gives you a steadier, more solid physical sensation while you're learning this. Okay? Anyway. Same thing here. I'm just going to let that top voice hold. And then, you know, that's the ideal way to play it. But of course, when you introduce all of the other complexity, it does get a little bit more challenging. F sharp. B with the bass. And don't do that. My apologies. I'm gonna play it as written without pedal. I shouldn't have used pedal there. My apologies. But I'm gonna go ahead and go on. With pedal. Clear. Notice you start to get a little bit of text in between there. It's like re and then tar and then dando, retardando, which is to gradually slow down, and it's drawn over a pretty large part. It's up to you as to whether or not you want to slow down in this phrase. You don't have to. You might want to wait till the next phrase, but you could start slowing down a little bit depending on your original tempo, which, by the way, I may not address this again, so I'm gonna address this now. Both of these tempos are a little fast, in my opinion, especially if you're like reaching up to get to this piece. You know, my recording goes slower than both of these. I think the first one is Schumann's original, and then I think his wife wrote in the second one, which is considered to be more musical. So, you know, if anything, take the 84. But I like it a little slower, and my recording reflects that. So, you know, just note that. But the cost of going slower is that you're slowing down, gradual slowdowns, retardandos, and things like that. They're not going to be very obvious if you're already going slow. So that means you're going to have to wait until later into a phrase or closer to a dramatic point to actually slow down to where it'll actually be felt in a meaningful way by your listener. So please keep that in mind. All right. Lastly, the really challenging piece, the only really challenging piece in this piece, the challenging measure, I meant to say, is this one. Let me show you. Before I even say anything, let me show you. And then I connect to the next part, right? That is pretty challenging. I am not going to lie. And it's because of what's going on in the bass. So we're going to take a very, very close look at that, okay? So I am going to show you the bottom two voices like I've been, and then I'm going to try to talk you through this. So here we go. We're holding this voice if possible, and now we're playing the 3 and the 2. Now what's going to happen is you have a 4-3, right? You're going to rearticulate 4, change to 3 immediately. It's helpful. It makes this more playable. It's not strictly necessary, but it's helpful, okay? So I'm going to show you that again. And then change to 3. Oops, I meant to hold the D. Okay, when you try to play this, you're going to see why this is challenging, because you're going to have trouble figuring out what fingers do I release and what fingers do I not release. So we really have to take a very careful look at this measure. So let's see if I can talk you through this. You are going to play the B and the D at the same time. And note that because of the multiple voices, you see this same note, which is not repeated. It's actually just held, but it's being expressed in multiple voices. Think of it like a group of singers. So the tenor has the upward-facing stems, or one of the male singers. Like let's call it a tenor, okay? Top male voice is going to take this voice, okay? And then there's going to be another singer that would sustain the D for the entire measure. And you have to hold this in your hand. You have to. The other voices can be and probably should be let go because you'll probably do a pedal clear, but you have to hold the D, because when you do a pedal clear and you're not holding the D, we're going to lose the D, and that goes against what has been written for you to do here. So there's a singer holding the D for the whole time, and then you have a bass doing that, substituting for the piano. You know, so you have all that at the same time. So let me show you. You can build this a couple of different ways, but let me show you the bottom. What we're going to do is we're just going to play. I'm going to try to draw this for you. We're actually going to separate out the top voice, and we're going to play the B and the D at the same time. We're going to do the substitution immediately like this, like that, right? Hold that D, and then I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to do that, no problem, as long as you know to do it. So start with the 4, substitute to 3, keep the D down, just go to the end of the hand. By the way, I have my thumb back here. Normally we're not going to want to do that, but train this until it's automatic. You can even use the counting. 1, oh, let, 2. 1, oh, let, 2. Note the substitution has to be right on the front end of the beat, and it has to be absolutely automatic. Okay? Now, when you incorporate the upward facing stem, so let me do that again, you can just tap the G. And then, so why don't you try that? I'm leaving out this for now. Try this. Substitute to 3, touch the G, and then A, low G. That's gonna get you where you need to go. So we're just layering that in, memorize this, work on this every day you work on the piece. Substitute, touch the G, hold everything else down. Touch the G. I know it's weird, but you'll get used to it. Now the G is going to hold into the next note. It's gonna look like this. We're gonna play it as written. Actually, I should have made it legato. This is so much harder than it looks, I think, for a lot of people. So if I'm making it look easy, note that it wasn't originally easy. Like, I worked it very carefully so that I can even demonstrate it for you all accurately. Okay, now I'm gonna play a little bit more. You're gonna have a big stretch to a ninth in the left hand. Like that. The pedal's gonna cover you. Here's what the pedal's gonna do. See? So it'll make, so you'll get a clear, actually I don't need to draw it in. So there's one pedal for the first beat, one pedal for the second beat. Also note that there's a fermata right when you get to beat 2. It's up to you as to how long you want to take this. You can listen to some recordings. Of course, I offer you an example. And also note that each of the sections are repeated. And so you can do something different with the length of this fermata, depending on whether you've played this part the first time or the second time. And if you are watching carefully in my recording, you'll notice that I actually do that. I think I take a longer, more dramatic pause on the second time. Anyway, so let me show you a couple of different ways where you might do that. And then I might wait for a second, and then I'll go on. And I'll add in the counting. 1, oh, let, 2, wait for a second. Oh, let. Right, we're gonna work the melody in there. Speaking of that, let's go ahead and do that. So we're gonna have to back up for this part. We're gonna go to the first measure of the system. And I'm gonna show you the fingering they have here. You're gonna do the 5, and then you're gonna wrap the 4 around, and then you're gonna hang out here for a second. And then you're gonna kind of pass through this last note and then just move on like this. And I'll go ahead and count so you can see what it looks like in motion. 1, oh, let. 2, oh, let. 1, oh, let. 2, oh, let. 1. How do you like that? I like it. I like it a lot. 1, oh, let. 2, oh, let. 1, oh, let. 2, oh, let. 1. Okay, now I'm going to show you, as best I can, with no pedal, all the parts. I'll hold here. Now with pedal. Oops, I accidentally substitute. Well, okay, I do this sometimes. Sometimes, for whatever reason, I can't help it. I'm an organist and I do substitution so much. I accidentally substitute there sometimes, which totally changes how all that plays out. So, let me try the way it's written where I only substitute on the left hand. You decide what you want to do. My apologies. clearing. Notice I'm holding all that, and then I'll kind of get back into it, and then I'll use that space with the pedal to get back into the next phrase, right? So it's pretty important. I'm going to mention this. It's pretty important once you've got these two measures locked down, you need to incorporate that as part of your practice of this, okay? And again, you're going to need to practice this measure every time you play these two measures. Every time you play this piece, every day you play this piece, you're going to have to isolate these until you flatten the difficulty of this, because it's just so much harder than the rest of the piece. I think this is one of those cases where perhaps the notation makes it harder to understand, but there's no other way to convey all of the precise timing of this, okay? Anyway. I did it again. I can't not do it. It's so automatic with the substitution on the right hand. I'll try not to. By the way, I love that chord. Like you can, the fermata can really help you. Well, the fermata happens before the A happens, right? That ninth, which you can let it go, and you don't have to play it at the same time. You don't have to stretch up there. You can just catch it in the pedal. You can do that. So if you're one of these people with a smaller hand where you can't reach a ninth, that's okay. You don't have to. But note that I did. All right, so that's all of the unique material for this piece. And then I do want to remind you, I showed you, every phrase I showed you, how slow you need to practice. And you're probably going to need to go slower than I did. You might need to go slower and also not hold a pulse yet and just do like note-by-note choreography, sort of like we did for the very difficult measure. You're probably going to have to do that on a lot of it, especially if you're not accustomed to working on a piece that's this difficult. You're working on like late beginner stuff, early intermediate stuff, and then you try this piece. It's not on the same level as those other pieces. But teachers often refer to pieces as stretch pieces when they can kind of lift a student up and out of where they are. This is very much one of those pieces, and this type of thing is exactly why. You don't have these two measures, the difficulty of these two measures. You don't have that for all of the page. You have it for a very small part of the page, which means there's a lot of this that's really, really accessible, and then there's a small bit of this that is a great opportunity for learning, okay? Now, let's talk about pedal briefly. You are mostly going to be pedaling, I think I already mentioned this, but you're mostly going to be pedaling once a pulse for the 2/4, right? So I'll show you. 1, clear, 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 right? And remember, the pedal is happening as you're pressing the new chord. So I still have it. I have the first pedal, and when I press the next thing, then I release and then put back down. So remember, the pedal is opposite to the motion of the hand. The pedal goes up, down, up, down. My foot's down right here, and it's going up, down, like that, okay? So that's how you're gonna wanna pedal this, and a couple of exceptions are maybe when you get to the last measure of the first section, you can allow that to just ring out because it's the same harmony. And I think that happens at the end of the piece, right? Slightly different. That's technically unique material. But it's just one little difference there at the end. Okay, so you can let the pedal just ring out there. Otherwise, you'll want to pedal twice a measure, like exactly. Not really much negotiation there. And then the another thing to touch on is the use of rubato, and I'm using a lot of it because it's just how I like to experience these pieces. So I'll count for you a little bit, and you can kind of get a sense of that. Rubato is where we're messing with the time. We're like having little subtle accelerations and decelerations in the pulse. I think of the pulse as elastic. That doesn't mean there's no pulse. It just means I'm manipulating the pulse, right? And I can use counting out loud towards that end. 1, oh, let, 2, oh, let, 1, oh, let, 2, oh, let, 1, oh, let, 2, oh, let, 1, oh, let, 2. I almost slipped there. 1, oh, let, 2, oh, let, 1, oh, let, 2, oh, let, 1, oh, let, 2. that's just an example. That's like my style. That's how I like to play this piece, or at least that's one possible way I would like to play this piece. And that's using a little bit of rubato. If I didn't use rubato, it would sound like this. 1 oh let a 2 oh let 1, and so on, right? It's pretty, but it's kind of boring, right? Compared to there's life in repose. Repose. A little bit more at the end of a section, and then you can kind of push through this middle section. Push through as in like move forward. Right, that helps you do it, that little 16th in the bass. I am slowing down here. Dramatic moment. Picking back up. Right, you get the idea. So that's how I think of rubato on this piece. I do use a good bit. The faster you go, the more you can get away with some messing around. But if you are taking it pretty slow, you just want a very subtle, movement in the middle of your phrase, and then still allow for that repose at the end. If you go too slow, you can't have any repose. So there is a fine line as to when it's too slow. Okay, it can't sound like practice. However, at the same time, use of rubato can help you get away with a lower tempo too. And we've already talked about melody separation. I just want to remind you, notice how clear the melody can stick out, right? What if I didn't? Right? That's not really the singable part that is really coming out. The left hand already has multiple notes. It's in a really resonant part of the piano. It's going to easily dominate that right hand unless you almost overdo it. You have to overdo it. By the way, that trick, that sound that I was just using where the notes are just slightly out of sync, that's called offsetting. Okay, again, that's another thing there's a fine line on, but I find that that's a great way to start to develop the separation, is to slightly offset the melody. It just comes slightly late. Right, and then as you get the sense of that, then you can bring them closer together. By the way, I just want to remind you, this note and this note, both of these notes, they are not part of the melody. So it's not this. It's not that, it's this. Right? So when you play this with all of the parts, that's what you need to try to convey. It's hard to do, but at least that's something to try to go for. Anyway, I know this is a pretty detailed tutorial. This is a very detailed piece. It is certainly more than meets the eye. I do hope you enjoyed studying this. Let me know if you need anything, if you have any comments or suggestions or questions on this. I'm happy to field those. And otherwise enjoy practicing this. And I will see you in the next video. Bye. 1 oh let 2 oh let 1 oh let 2 oh let 1 oh let a 2 oh let 1 oh let 2 oh let 1 oh let a 2 oh let 1 oh let 2 oh let 1 oh let a 2 oh let 1 oh let 2 oh let 1 2 1 oh let 2 oh let 1 oh let a 2 oh one oh let a two. Let one oh let two oh let one oh let a two oh let one oh let two oh let one